Hello Management 460 class, my name is Danny Velasco and I'll be doing an overview on the Janus case. The case that my colleagues discussed was a landmark U.S. labor law concerning the power of labor unions. To quickly summarize the case, we begin in 1977. The Supreme Court unanimously ruled the Abood versus Detroit Board of Education that states that states may charge public employees to pay fees towards a union representation, even if they did not want to join the union. In Janus versus American Federal of State, County, and Municipal Employees, the Supreme Court reconsiders if this decision was actually constitutional. The questioning began again when Mark Janus, who did not want to be part of the union, was being forced to pay membership under the Illinois law that all public employees represented by an exclusive bargaining union were required to pay the dues as a condition of employment. Mark Janus was represented by the American Federal of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Janus was refusing to join his unions because he opposed many of its political positions that the union was funding, and he felt as if his money was being wasted. So Janus took matters into his own hands and filed a lawsuit against his union, claiming that deducting union dues from his monthly paycheck violated his First Amendment right. In particular, Janus argues that requiring him to subsidize the union forced him to finance his speech on matters of major public concern. The Supreme took the case and ruled on a 5-4 vote in favor of the plaintiff, Mark Janus, meaning that the Abood versus Detroit Board of Education was overruled, giving the freedom for public school teachers, first responders, and other government workers. Now joining us is Mark Janus himself.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Now tell us, when you won this case, what did it mean?
Well, it meant that approximately 5.5 million public sector workers now had a voice and a choice to decide their own fate, if you will, as to whether they wanted to be a member of the union or not. Prior to this ruling, many public sector union people, they were forced to pay an agency fee or a what they called a fair share fee. However, even though they only paid 80% roughly, they didn't have a choice and a vote. They couldn't decide anything, in the way the unions were voting and decided their fate. And because they were mandatory in so many areas, like in the state of Illinois, they just, were forced into paying this, and they just didn't have a choice or a voice in anything.
Even though you did win the case, do the unions abide to the ruling, or are they fighting back?
Oh, they're fighting back in lots of different ways. They're providing just a plethora of misinformation to their members, and or public sector workers in general, saying that, well, if you aren't a member of our union, you could lose your pension. Well, that's totally false, because the pensions are mostly administered by the employer, or the government entity. And so that's not correct. They're saying that you could lose your health benefits. Well, that's false, because, again, the employer provides the health benefits. They also say you could lose your wages. Well, how are you going to lose wages? Because you've got a contract that says that you're going to get paid a certain amount of money based on that contract.
After you won the case, were you surprised that these unions have adopted these additional tactics?
Well, not really, because during the initial filing of the case in 2015, and the fact that there were some previous cases, such as Friedrichs versus California Teachers, which was originated out in California, and that case was actually a parallel and very similar to my case. It was resulted in a 4-4 tie because Justice Scalia passed away, and so therefore our case then became, the next one in line, if you will. And what was very interesting is that the unions had approximately 3 years to prepare for this, which they did by putting out mountains of propaganda, going to their state legislatures and getting laws passed, to try to circumvent. And we're seeing today there's still legislation being passed in various states across the country where the unions are trying to circumvent the ruling. For example, they say they no longer call it an agency fee or a fair share fee. Now they're saying that, well, yes, you can get out of the union, but you owe us a service fee. They're just changing the name for the same thing that they had before.
Now I have to ask, because you spent several years in court fighting this. You won. You should have said, okay, I'm done, and I'll go on my merry way. Why did you continue to work on this issue?
Well, mainly because I saw the large amount of pushback that the unions were putting out there, the massive amounts of misinformation, and the fact that I saw workers that, even though we had this decision, were not allowed to exercise their First Amendment rights, their freedom of speech and their freedom of association. And the fact that the unions were not letting people get out, if you will, if that's what they chose to do. And I want to emphasize that, this case is not about putting unions out of business. It's not about ending collective bargaining at all. It's mainly giving workers the choice to make their own decision, which they have not had in the past.
The story is far from over. Do you think at one point we will get to the state a government worker will have the choice everywhere in the country?
Oh, I think so. It's going to take several years. I mean, it's like a lot of other Supreme Court decisions that have come down the pike, so to speak, where people, they resisted initially, but then eventually they fall in line because, quite frankly, there's a lot of litigation out there. At Liberty Justice Center, who I represent and now work for, we have cases filed all over the country. We have California, New Mexico, we have Hawaii, and more every day, because people are coming to us asking us for assistance and help because they've tried to do it on their own and the unions just aren't listening. And there are also all kinds of state legislatures that are causing all kinds of difficulties.
Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Janus. Now back to the class. Do you agree with the stance of Mr. Janus, or do you disagree?